In today's episode of Stories from Real Life, we're stepping inside the clubhouse with hospitality leader Joe Carlucci, a man who spent his career turning golf clubs and restaurants into communities. In this conversation, we talk about leadership, creativity, and the small details that turn a good experience into an unforgettable one. Whether you're a golfer, a restaurant owner, or just someone who loves people, this episode is for you. This is Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, and today's story is Joe Carlucci's Beyond the 18th Hole, the Heart of Hospitality.
And, my question to all these, when I talk to these people is, would somebody go to that place if they weren't playing golf? If you weren't already there, would you go there on your own? And in some cases, in places that we've been doing, the answer is a resounding yes. And in a lot of places, it's not, because most people only think that their intention is to take care of the golfers that are there. And mine's not. Mine's, I want to take care of the community, not just the golfers.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. My guest today is golfer, hospitality expert, and self-described charming guy, Joe Carlucci. Joe, welcome to the show
Thanks,
today.
Mel. Nice to see you. Nice to be on. I appreciate you having me with you today. Self-proclaimed charming guy. Okay. Well, you must...
I'm glad to have you here.
My wife. Yeah. That's good. You got me on that one.
You started your career as a concert promoter for Dick Clark Productions, producing over 1,000 concerts with legends like Freddie Mercury, Dolly Parton, and Led Zeppelin. What did you learn from those experiences?
Well, it's an interesting thing because it was a prelude to, I did that for a little over 7 years, but it was a prelude to what I wound up doing as a career in the restaurants. And, it was constant change. It was you could imagine, it was a fun gig. And, when you get an opportunity to meet people that you hear on the radio or see on TV, and you come across a lot of famous people, and it's fun when you gather people and you create something where 60,000 people, 20,000 people, 5,000 people show up to. You sort of get a feeling of everybody's having a good time because of something that we created. And that's fun. But, we didn't create the show. We just created the opportunity for them to perform in front of the people that in our community. And that's a great feeling. So, as far as, being around successful people, because most of them or all of them are very successful, you sort of forgetting that they're putting the fact that they're celebrities aside. You kind of watch them and you learn from them. How do they handle themselves? How do they treat the people around them? What excites them? How do they interact with their audience? Are they appreciative of the fact that people spent their hard-earned money, and hours to go see them? I mean, a lot of those people did. Some didn't, but you kind of learn a lot about your own behavior when you watch more successful people behave themselves. I would say that's one of the things selectively that I got out of it, and so do some of the other people that we worked with. But I would say that. And the other thing, when I started getting into the restaurant business, it was also, and this is the business side of it, is how to manage risk, because you're always betting your own money when you're dealing with concerts. And, so you have to be very careful and, judicious about who you book, how you book them, and then also how to promote them. they're all different levels of businesses you kind of learn within the business. And, that's fun for me. And I enjoyed it. And then when, even though Dick Clark owned the company, we didn't really have much. My boss, who was Dick Clark's partner, had more interaction with Dick than I did. It wasn't until, we talked to him about 10 times a year, maybe. It wasn't until we were going to do a restaurant together, maybe 10 years later, that I had, time to interact with him more. And, it's really, it sounds fun when you're in the concert business and you're sitting around the dressing room with a lot of famous people. But at the end of the day, it's really what I enjoyed most was the business side of it. It was listen, I was a kid, I was making $100 a week. I would have paid them $100 a week to go to work for. It was that interesting of a job. And it wasn't just that you met the performers. A lot of people needed to go through you to get tickets. So you met a lot of interesting people in your community, politicians, radio people like yourself, or I don't know, I'm guessing that, part of what you're doing is that, but, you meet interesting people along the way. And again, one of the things that I always watched was how successful people behaved. And, you see some real jerks and some really great people, and you learn both ends of it. And it affects, it affected me about how I treat people. That guy's always going to be more successful than me, and he treated people great. Why can't I? And I see other people, that are in my business or people that I do business that are complete jerks, have no reason to be. And, you sort of, you get your hairs on the back of your head going when you can spot those people right away. And, so those are the kind of things that I take away from it was, kind of how to behave, you learn a lot about business. And, one of the things that Dick Clark, told me was there's a reason why they call it show business. Half of it's show and half of it's business. If you do one or the other too well, one's going to suffer. So you're always balancing. And you can never lose track of that. And you can never lose track of being too impressed with the people that you're doing business with, because you're there for business. Ultimately we need to make money. And, that was always the thing that, we were doing. And we didn't always, every show didn't always make money. It was very, one of the part of the things, staying on the show business thing is, when we were, if I was talking to an agent who really wanted us to book one of their artists, and I go, man, that's kind of a loser. No offense. I don't think he's ready for, this market. And mostly we were doing shows in Pittsburgh then. It wasn't until later on we had our own theater outside of New York. But, and they'd say, look, dude, if you want Fleetwood Mac that's going to sell out in 2 seconds, I want you to take this guy. So, well, this guy's going to lose us, $4,000 or $5,000. Going to make it up 2 days later with Fleetwood Mac. All right. It's kind of how do you balance business? To me, that was, I learned that, when you talk to, my boss then, he just said, that's the way they are. I mean, you have to accept that you're going to be, I don't know, punished is the wrong word, but you kind of felt that way, when you're, in your early 20s and you're thinking, hey, man, it really doesn't make sense. I don't understand why, we're going to lose money and you're selling me something that's going to lose money, but we're supposed to have a relationship of trust. And, eventually you get over it when you understand it, but, it just stuck with me. And, through that time, you learn how to negotiate. And you negotiate, here's a winner or loser. At the end of the week, you finish the week ahead. And, you just don't take things personally, which took me a long time to understand that, it looks bad if you bring in a loser.
All right, let's talk about golf. I know that's something that you're really passionate about. So what first drew you to the hospitality side of the golf industry?
Well, I'm a lifelong golfer, and I've played, I don't know, maybe 200 golf courses, in my lifetime, or traveled around. Just people, when I go to San Antonio or places like that, we'd always play a couple of rounds of golf. And, I found that after we played golf, and these are all good golf courses, we left the golf course and went somewhere down the road. to, have lunch or have dinner and have some drinks, settle bets, and do what we do. And I always thought that, it was a losing proposition for a golf course to not pay attention to their clubhouse and lose the experience that you're supposed to have by us being guests. And, a friend of mine was an asset manager of the PGA Resort in West Palm Beach. And he said, listen, we bought this hotel and we're reconcepting the hospitality. We need somebody like an independent restaurant guy to kind of oversee some of the concepts. So what do we need to do? What don't we need to do? And so, I kind of got a taste of it there because they had 6 or 7 golf courses there. And simultaneously to that, there was another very high profile restaurant down the street golf course down the street from a restaurant that I was involved with. And they were building a 45,000 square foot clubhouse. And somebody showed me the plans for the restaurant. And, you knew right away it was not a good thing. So I got involved with them and turned what was going to be maybe $1.5 million restaurant into a $6 million restaurant. And, I look at clubhouses from a lens of an independent restaurant guy. At the end of the day, that's all there are bars and restaurants. There are banquet rooms, there are other things that go on there, but mostly the amount of volume being generated is from the bar and the restaurant. So I don't look at them as, anything other than how they could be special for not only golfers, but the community. And, they're at the end of the day, they're just really great civic assets. It's an opportunity to bring a lot of people together. You don't have to golf there, go there. If it's a good enough place, would you go there? And, they should be able to say that, but a lot of places don't. They wind up, some of these clubhouses spend, a couple of $1 million redoing the inside of their clubhouse, and all they did is make a nicer looking underperforming place because they didn't catch the hospitality right. And they didn't get the experience of what's going on the golf course to what's going on inside of the clubhouse. And that's where the disconnect is, and that's where it shouldn't be. So, there are opportunities that are missed, but mostly it's about, the community not having an opportunity to get together. And even if it's a private club, that's their community. If it's a public facility, the whole town wants to go there because they're investing in it. Ultimately, they're paying for it. It's coming out of somebody's tax dollars. And, they want to feel like they have a part of it. And, my question to all these, when I talk to these people is, would somebody go to that place if they weren't playing golf? If you weren't already there, would you go there on your own? And in some cases, in the places that we've been doing, the answer is a resounding yes. And in a lot of places, it's not, because most people only think that their intention is to take care of the golfers that are there. And mine's not. Mine's, I want to take care of the community, not just the golfers. And, I feel like these people should be using and talking to more people like myself, who is a hospitality guy and not just an architect and a designer, who do great jobs. I'm not, besmirching them, but on the other hand, they're missing an opportunity to do something really well. And nowadays, everybody's a little cautious about how they spend their money. And when they do, they want to make sure that they're getting their money's worth. So if they go and spend $50 or $100 on a round of golf, that golf was okay, but good. But I kind of left unfulfilled because when I went inside to have a drink or, a hamburger, this wasn't a place where I really would not particularly choose to be at.
That leads me right into my next question. So running a clubhouse blends sports, service, and storytelling. What's your philosophy for building a welcoming environment that keeps people coming back? For me,
the heart and soul of a place like that is the bar. And you have to have a bar energetic. It's interesting. Listen, bars go back hundreds of years because that's where people congregated in towns. That's where the only place they get to see each other than maybe church. but that's where people got their news. And I'm going back a couple hundred years, but I would say that, the first point of entry has to be the bar, and, then the dining room. But mostly it really has to be that there's a expectation of hospitality. People, they want to see you. They want to know that you're appreciated by leaving the golf course, walking into their restaurant and their bar. And, you could have a big bar where, we have a lot of kids sit in bars, in the afternoons where they're having, having chicken fingers or, Cokes or things like that. They don't, it's not just we're telling people, no, you can't bring your families in, but they could be outside on the patio, but at the end of the day, we want people to come at 5 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night and, spend an hour or two there. But it really starts with, on the hospitality side, that the people sense it. And too, yourself, when you go out to dinner with your wife and your daughter, when you walk into a place within 2 minutes, whether you're going to like it or not. And, so we have to create that same experience for people that aren't golfers, And from a business level, it probably could outgross, the revenues that you do on your golf course. So you should pay a lot more attention to it. And the financial end of it is recouped much faster than if you didn't have it, because, all the business that you're losing, you're sending them down the road. Even the guys in the clubhouse are saying, maybe you're better off going down the street because it's and that's who your competition is, whether you believe it or not, whether you understand it when you do these places, is it's not the other public or private course around the neighborhood. It's the restaurant and it's the bar in your neighborhood, because that's who they're comparing you to, whether you want to accept that or not. That's what it is. And again, it goes back to what's the experience. And, why I do what I do is I'm very passionate about creating this experience for the golf industry that's totally lagging behind, what that experience could be. They're just leaving so much opportunity on the table, not only for their business, but for the effect that it has on their golf course and in their own community. That's why I love what I do.
All right. So can you share a story of a memorable guest or member interaction that perfectly captures what hospitality means to you?
Well, hospitality is, people don't really understand sometimes the difference between hospitality and service. Everybody expects good service when they walk into a place, but service is what occurs. Hospitality is how you feel. Hospitality is how does that waiter or bartender or manager, owner come by and whether they say hello, make the experience of you being there special. So I'll give you an example of Howard Schultz, who, kind of the founder, not the founder, but the guy who created Starbucks and made Starbucks such a behemoth thing. Their second location in Chicago was right across the street from our restaurant. And so he would, once in a while when he was in Chicago, he'd come by, he'd go visit his store, there's a coffee shop there, and then come into the restaurant. And, we knew who he was and everything. Just, he wasn't Howard Schultz then. He was just a guy that was involved with Starbucks. So we knew that, he liked his coffee better than he's going to like our coffee. So every time he came in, we sent somebody across the street to get his coffee in his mug or in his cups. And he appreciated the gesture. It was a small gesture. It was easy for us to do. We sent somebody across the street, bought him back his coffee, and he loved it. He loved the fact that we went extra to do something for him. And that's what hospitality is about. It's about doing things extra that customers really don't expect that we do. And once we pick up, kind of a vibe on how people might want to react. Like there was one place we had where we would take kids into the back where we made pizzas. So the kids would roll out the dough, throw their own stuff on top. They create their own thing and we allow them to put it in the oven and then send them back and they'd eat their own pizza. They loved it. That's hospitality. They could have ordered a pizza and shared it with their brother and sister, but the fact that they made it, the parents appreciated it, the kids appreciated it. It's just, again, doing a little bit extra. It's not about the service, it's about the hospitality. And the hospitality is about the feeling, not what else goes on there. And it's hard to do. A lot of people don't get it. They think it's enough to have food and service. Certainly very, very important. But hospitality, that's the reason why the company is called Chicago Carlucci Hospitality Group. We're about hospitality. We want to make people feel comfortable. And one time somebody came in and said, I love coming to this place. It makes me feel at home, like I'm at home here. And I said, well, if we make you feel at home, dude, we made $1 million mistake. We're supposed to give you a reason to get out of your house and come visit us. So it's, but it's all banter, and it's doing unexpected, appreciative things that people don't get. But mostly, hospitality is about appreciation more than it is about anything else.
All right, the dining experience is often the heart of a clubhouse. What separates a good meal from a great one?
Good question. That's sort of in the eye of the beholder. It's not, if you ask, you talk amongst your friend, if you ask them what makes a good restaurant, food is never the first thing that comes out of their mouth. So, you would think you're baiting me for the obvious answer, which is, great food. Oh, I have a great chef. It's not. It's really about the experience. It makes you, nowadays, when I first started in this business, maybe 30% of new restaurants were any good. Now, if 10 restaurants open, 3 would be good, 2 would be okay, and 5 would be lousy. Now, if 10 restaurants open, 9 are really good and 1's just good. It's a very competitive market. So what really makes a good meal great is things that are unexpected as part of the meal. What's assuming that the food's going to be good, what's your presentation like? What makes the atmosphere interesting to be in? What are the energy levels? How's the food? How's the noise level? How are the uniforms for the waiters? How do people look around you? It's all part of, going back to what I did before, it's all part of putting on a show. And every day is a new show, new audience. And that's what it's. You don't walk out of a place thinking, oh, that was great food. You walk out of that place saying, we had a great time. So that's really and food is, don't get me wrong, I'm not putting it in the unimportant category, but it's really what's the experience inside that restaurant, assuming that the food's good. You have a fun wine glass. You ordered a martini, and the martini comes out in a really cool glass. It's shaking at the table. Whatever the theatrics are, whatever you do that's different, that makes them appreciate what's going on.
So, how do you balance tradition and with innovation when you're updating your menus, events, and the overall restaurant experience?
Well, innovation's an interesting word, because I think that when you talk about innovation, I'm not sure what that means to a customer. Is innovation something like, I've had food that I've never had before, presented like it's never been before? What's the excitement factor? So I don't know that you necessarily have to be like innovative, because people, when they spend their money, aren't looking for innovation. They're looking for, in a way, how am I going to spend $100 that it's going to be predictable? Now, innovation could come from, in my case, it's Italian food mostly. Presentation could be things that you could watch people making the dough or making the pizza, the dough that they're going to have. We have, one of our signature items is we would bring a big wheel of Parmesan cheese to a table, and if you ordered that particular dish, we toss the linguine at the table and put on a show and doing all the theatrics of what you ordered. Man, that's right. If you could bring the kitchen out into the dining room, or the bar out into the dining room, people love that. Innovation is also, I don't, you'd have to describe what you mean by innovation, because the innovation in our business is, we want to be consistent. I don't want to say predictable, but we want people to show up knowing what they're showing up for. I think innovation is, getting high-end chefs or something that are doing, some fun things with food, but I don't know that you call it innovation and getting things that you haven't seen before.
Okay. I have a Chicagoland friend who I was talking to today, and I told her I was going to have you on the podcast, and she's been to your restaurant. She mentioned how great the food is. And she had a question that she wanted me to ask you. And this is her question. How have rising food costs affected your business? And have you anticipate having to make any changes to the menu to accommodate the changes?
Well, rising food costs are, and everybody focuses on rising food costs, but it's really not just food costs that have risen. It's employee cost has risen. Insurance costs have risen. Just every almost line item that you do, they're going up, and they're going to continue to go up. And my worry is, to your friend, is, she's been to my restaurant and liked it, fooled another one. Tell her thank you very much. I appreciate that. She would come in, a year ago, had a great meal for $100. She comes back a year later, and now you have the same great meal for $130. And it's kind of like, how do you keep that person, your friend, happy, knowing they're going to spend more money? And it's a fight. And we have to value engineer our menu so that not every item is just gone up in price. Some things we can bring down. We can bring down some prices on certain items on our menu because we make deals with the vendors to buy a certain amount. They want to move volume. So we can lower the prices on some things, and we have to raise on the others. But when we look at our financial statement, it still comes out to a certain percentage that we're going for. But, we're always conscious of, and it starts with the customer. How do we present what we do to them? Because they're the ultimate critic. And we can't keep saying, oh, this went up, so we have to keep charging. We'll charge ourselves out of business if you're not careful.
All right, so you've led diverse teams, from chefs to servers to groundskeepers. What's your approach to building unity across so many different kinds of roles?
Well, the first word that comes to mind is communication. Everybody needs to kind of see each other and see what each other does and appreciates what everybody does. Just because, the guy washing dishes in the back, doesn't get, the same interaction with, the servers, we have to make sure that the servers really appreciate what these guys in the back do. And the guys in the back have to appreciate what the servers are doing for them, because we're all together and we're all marching in this, in the same order so that we become successful for each other. And the big thing is, how do we bring people that really don't know each other except for, 3 or 4 hours a day together and spend a little time together. And, it's just, I think they don't have to know each other, but I think they have to appreciate each other. And that starts, mostly with me, because that's the way I am, then the way I am, drifts down. And, that going back to a Dick Clark lesson, he once told me that, more people will know him through me because they'll never meet him. So if they think you're a jerk, they're going to think he's a bigger jerk for hiring me. And, and the same thing. And he gave me an example. He said, if a road manager that you're dealing with is a jerk, I have another name for it, but you told me not to swear on your podcast. And he said, if the road manager's a jerk, when you walk in to meet the band, they're bigger jerks. And that was like 100% the case. So when you take on the responsibility of owning a business and bringing people along with you to, make that business successful, again, I keep using the word appreciation. You have to show them that you appreciate what they do. It doesn't mean you can't be not hard on them, but, kind of here are the rules, stick by them. We're all going to be good. I'm not going to micromanage you. I have there are too many other things that make this business work, for me to spend too much time with any one person. But everybody has to kind of get along and appreciate. You don't have to like everybody, but you can't dislike anybody, because that doesn't work at all. And it's kind of, you can almost feel it when you talk to somebody about whether they're going to be a good fit for what you're about and not, and you've come across that when, people that have hired you and people that have worked with you, I don't know if, I want to do what I do for them, and it's mostly like, if I hire somebody that I know is only in it for the money, I know they're only going to be temporary, but and I'll pay them. But if I hire somebody that is in it for everybody else, they want to make everybody else successful and them too, this is going to work out better. Because the difference between somebody who just wants to be a boss versus somebody who wants to be a boss to be successful at what they do.
Okay, so let's go back into the golf arena and clubhouses in particular. So you talked about having played roughly 200 golf courses. What has been the most memorable clubhouse experience that you've had?
That's a good question. The one that sticks out, I don't know if there's necessarily one. The ones that stick out are always the ones that are busiest, and that have the good ones have had excitement going on in their facility. So I wouldn't say that there's one particular place, and it's just that that the whole day was good, that we finished or started the day off well. And, these people got the hospitality side of it really, really well. And, the food was good. The bar was good. Service was good. The atmosphere is a big thing. And people need to understand, especially the designers, that there's a difference between when you create a bar, there's a difference between a place to get a drink and a place you want to go get a drink. And there are just all kinds of little tidbits along that way, but experience in a clubhouse probably involving after a golf outing stories and not stories, but just again giving you reasons to stick around. And they not necessarily are they the nicer places and the more upscale places. Some of the ones that are decent, okay, muni courses, but you know what? They have a fun place. They have a fun staff. They have a group of people that, they're there. They understand the hospitality side. They might not have spent $2 million building out their bar, but what they did have was, a good place to, I don't want to call it a dive bar, but, a good enough bar to want to hang around there because the people were fun, the drinks were fun, and you could tell they knew how to run a bar. And, food doesn't have to be interesting, just has to be good, because nobody's going to a golf course to do a culinary dive, around town. They're not looking for who's the hot chef behind this kitchen. Food food really has to be good and has to be consistent and has to be interesting to look at, but nobody's going there for what your word is, innovation.
Right, so let's talk about comfort food. So what is a comforting meal to you? Maybe something that reminds you of your childhood, one of your favorites.
Well, because I'm Italian, I'm going right to spaghetti and meatballs, okay? And there's the stuff we grew up with. My mother's recipe was amazing, and it was like something that, now we had 9 kids in our family, so we had a big table. And, it's funny, when the Irish kids found out my mother was cooking spaghetti and meatballs, they all wanted to worm an invitation over, because their idea of spaghetti and meatballs at their place was ketchup on pasta and something else. So they loved it. So I would say that. But when you hear about comfort food, you hear about pot pies. And I'm going to say hamburger, but a hamburger would be right up there. Things that evoke what you grew up with. And nowadays, so talking about, I went to a place that had a really great pot pie, but it had a big thing of bone marrow in the middle of the pie, and it was great. There's somebody paying attention to something unique, and it tasted great. The presentation was good. But it's really about what makes you feel good. Mashed potatoes, peas, corn, just basic stuff. Macaroni and cheese. What else? Meatloaf. Those are the kind of things that.
Yep, there you go.
Comfort.
That's what I was thinking about. Being from Texas, I was thinking meatloaf and mashed potatoes.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, that's great. I mean, all those things, and and I'm sure that you have your particular favorites about what your mother made for your family, and hanging out with your brothers, and what you were switching for. Like, my brother hated peas, but he liked corn. I liked peas. I didn't like corn. So we'd be switching back and forth, just, things like that, always bring you back to where you were. I really appreciate the fact that my wife has gotten my mother's recipe and actually made it just a little bit better than hers. And, it's very, very good and most appreciated when you get it. You never get tired of it. Those are your favorite foods, if I had one last meal, it'd be spaghetti and meatballs. Some guys would say, "Oh, I want a big steak." I go, "Nah, that's not comfort food. That's something else." Where your soul is in food. I'm very lucky that I had, kind of two careers with things that are, popular with great common denominators amongst people, food and music. If you and I had never met, which we haven't yet, but if you and I are standing next to each other at a bar, started talking, if I say, "What's your favorite song?" Boom, you have a conversation to start with. If I say to you, "What's your favorite food?" You're going to that. Okay, there's two things we could talk about. We don't have to, spend an hour trying to figure out, what do you do? What is this? What is that? You get the polite stuff. Let's get right to it, man. What do you like? And then, most people love to talk about things that they like.
Food and music. That's a good conversation starters.
Food and music. Yeah, they are. They really are. Listen, you talk to so many people, you have to figure out how to break that ice right away. So you're much better at it than I am, and it's just, that's how I start. If I find that, I have somebody that I'm stuck next to that's boring as hell, I don't know where this goes. Hey, what's your favorite song? And then it goes from there. It just goes on. And that's all you talk about why it is, what happened, whether you're making out in the backseat of the car to the song. There's always a story behind the song. It's not just that it's your favorite song. It's something happened with that song. So that's, that's always a good thing.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. Because I listen to this station on iHeart that has Casey Kasem's top 40 from the 70s and 80s. So the years I was growing up. Right. And so you hear a song and you can automatically put yourself back in that situation when that song became meaningful to you. So those are kind of living memories that we all want to capture for as long as possible. All right, I just have a couple questions left as we start to wind down the conversation. So you talked about a last meal of your mom's spaghetti and meatballs. So let's say we don't want to make it morbid. So not a last meal, but just a celebratory meal. And you're having 3 people from any era in your restaurant with a big dish of your mom's spaghetti and meatballs. Which 3 people are you inviting to that dinner?
Wow. That's a tough question. One would be Mickey Mantle because he was my childhood hero growing up. Another would be a guy named Armand Hammer, who was kind of an industrialist kind of character. Let's say, who would the third person be? I don't know why this name comes into my head, but Dolly.
I'm pointing to me, so I'm pointing to me, so you can bring me over for some spaghetti. I would love that.
Well, Mel, you're the fourth. You're the guider of the conversation. You start with them. Yeah, I'd love to have dinner with you, Mel, but you gotta wear your cowboy hat, dude. It's just like I was looking forward to seeing the cowboy hat when I
can wear the cowboy if wearing the cowboy hat gets me some old fashioned spaghetti and meatballs. That is not an inconvenience. That would be a privilege. All right. So last question here. When you look back at your career, what legacy do you hope to leave in the world of hospitality and golf club leadership?
Well, let's take the hospitality side first. I want to leave a legacy that I had a bunch of chefs and managers that went ahead and opened up their own restaurants, and they took the same spirit of hospitality with them. And, the spirit of hospitality learned a lesson about how to take care of people, helping people, being part of your community, being any business that's in a neighborhood is a neighborhood business, no matter how busy it is. And, I want to make sure that, there's a legacy with the people that I was involved with, and people who know and who know my restaurants know that I had a brand or have a brand that says it's quality. So we're quality people. We work with quality people, and most of our customers are quality people. And on the golf side, I want to create things. All the things that we do create are going to be around for 25 years. So, it's not like, oh, this restaurant or this clubhouse, we help transform this clubhouse. We help transform this clubhouse for a legacy, and legacy is time. And I want to make sure that whenever we get involved with something, we leave it for a long time to come.
All right, that's a perfect way to wind up this episode. So our guest today has been one of Chicago's finest, Joe Carlucci. So Joe, thanks a lot for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Well, Mel, it was fun talking to you and being with you. I hope I didn't rattle on too much, but I really enjoyed meeting you and being on the show. And, let's hope our fan club members appreciate us for doing.
I'm sure they will.
Now, like you might say, what the hell did you have that guy on the phone?
Yeah, they're going to want to go to Chicago now so they can come into your restaurant and look for some of your mom's spaghetti.
Yes.
All right, that's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stories from Real Life. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's meet right here every Tuesday and Friday. See you then.